wouldn't be a First Amendment without the Second Amendment. Your right to freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, the freedom and liberties that we have in this country are because of the Second Amendment. And never, ever forget that.
She's not going to be the great savior for the Democrats. And they can't skip over the first black woman vice president with the white ever in history, Gavin Newsom.
It's time that we, the people, take this country back.
And if you try to transition a child, you are guilty of child abuse, and every doctor, every nurse, every clinician that is helping that is culpable in that crime.
This thing is so full of pork that even Scrooge and the Grinch are happy about it.
No, there wouldn't be a First Amendment without the Second Amendment. Your right to freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, the freedom and liberties that we have in this country are because of the Second Amendment. And never, ever forget that.
She's not going to be the great savior for the Democrats. And they can't skip over the first black woman vice president with the whitest man ever in history, Gavin Newsom.
It's time that we, the people, take this country back.
And if you try to transition a child, you are guilty of child abuse, and every doctor, every nurse, every clinician that is helping that is culpable in that crime.
This thing is so full of pork that even Scrooge and the Grinch are happy about it.
No, there wouldn't be a First Amendment without the Second Amendment. Your right to freedom of speech, your freedom of religion, the freedom and liberties that we have in this country are because of the Second Amendment. And never, ever forget that.
She's not going to be the great savior for the Democrats. And they can't skip over the first black woman vice president with the whitest man ever in history, Gavin Newsom.
It's time that we, the people, take this country back. Hello and welcome to episode 29 of Restoring the Republic. And you know what? It is reconciliation time, or as I would say, Reconcili-ACTION. And quite frankly, that's what needs to happen. So I'm Congressman Andy Ogles. This is episode 29 of Restoring the Republic. So what's going on in Washington, D.C. is we're going through this process of the budget and aligning with the House and the Senate. And if we both pass budget bills that match up during this reconciliation period, then it only requires a simple majority in the Senate, which is a big deal for them. And so, but unfortunately, the House has really been unable to now keep in mind, the House Freedom Caucus has, I'll get to that in a moment, but the House hasn't put together a plan until this morning. Now, I would argue this plan is kind of in the vein of this one big beautiful bill, but the problem with one big beautiful bill is it's got too much in it or not enough cuts. And so the House Freedom Caucus, we took the initiative after negotiations of what this thing could look like. And look, at the end of the day, the president has said it. The Secretary of Homeland Security has said it. He needs money for the border. So what we did is immediately put forward a plan that puts in $100 billion for border security, $100 billion for national defense. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on around the nation as we obviously are in a dangerous era because of President Biden's failed policies. And then we also had almost $500 billion in spending cuts, which is again why I think Donald Trump, I know in fact, is why Donald Trump won the presidential race, because he was talking about restoring the republic, getting back to fiscal sanity. So part of that is, yes, we have to do things like for Homeland Security and our nation's security, but also there's a lot of pork and waste out there. We know that. I mean, the DOGE initiative, by the way, which is driving the left absolutely insane. They keep finding waste after waste after waste. And what they're working on is to vanquish that deep state that has, in President Trump's first term, worked against him. So you would have the president of the United States, he would have his secretaries, and they're trying to do the things that the American people want. And what happens? These elected woke bureaucrats are working against them. So I have a bill which addresses or talks about fixing the deep state or allowing the president to fire the deep state, which codifies his Schedule F. And I've kind of jumped ahead, I do believe, but that's okay because it's live and that's how I roll. But what it does is allows the president to fire those folks who have worked their way up. They're in policy making decisions. They have influence. They're implementing policy. And if they're not doing their jobs, now look, you don't have to agree with him, but if you want the role, you have to do the job. And if you can't do the job and you're not able or willing to transfer to another department, your butt gets fired. And so it's important that that's implemented. And by passing it through Congress, it means that it's effective now under President Trump's term, but also as we go forward. And so it's important that we move forward with reconciliation. The Senate, by the way, because this is a House and Senate effort, the Senate is moving forward. Now, they have a 2-bill strategy. The House has a 1-bill strategy, which in and of itself is a problem, but that can be sorted out later in the next couple of weeks. Our deadline's March 14th, so the clock is ticking. And so I was a little frustrated. I'm sure a lot of you watched the Super Bowl, but instead of staying here in D.C., I was willing to stay here and work and to hammer some of these things out. And of course, we were off. And so it's frustrating, but just know that I'm working on it. The House Freedom Caucus is working on it. We took the lead in putting a House bill forward. So with that, I'll pause here. Watch this clip.
Because I'm being realistic. We can do what we can with the money we have. We're going to try to be efficient, but with the more money we have, the more we can accomplish. If I don't have the money to remove that millions of people, I'm not going to sit here and one thing, no one can say I haven't been frank in everything I've said. Our success every day is taking a public safety threat off the streets or getting a national security threat out of here.
So there you have it. From the Secretary himself, we need to fund the deportations. So we have to secure the border, but we also have to deport those people that shouldn't be here. So I'm on the Financial Services Committee, which is kind of the banking and the economy committee, but I'm also on Homeland Security, and border is one of those things that we deal with in my committee. And I can tell you, I just had a confidential briefing or a top secret briefing. We have people in this country that shouldn't be here, one, because they broke the law, but two, they pose a threat to you, to me, and to our nation. So it's important that we secure the border, enforce our laws. And so part of this and why we should move quickly, the American people want it. They want a secure border. They want a community that is safe. All across America, we have communities that are crime-ridden. And here in a moment, we'll talk about that even in Nashville. But we'll jump to foreign policy for just a moment. I had a bill, or I sent a letter to President Trump urging him to remove the duty-free allowances we give South Africa to move goods into our country, as well as ending diplomatic relations with them. And so this is a big deal. South Africa has been persecuting native white Africans, people who have been there, who were born there. They've supported Hamas. They've cozied up to China. They're doing a lot of things that we would be criticized for here in America. They've actively undermined the United States, our own interest, not only at home, but in the region. And so it's important that we send a message to these countries like the president did with Colombia. I had a letter that I sent to Honduras because of some of the bad things that they were doing. The president talked about 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. So by playing hardball, get these countries to recognize America's back. We're not going to be pushed around. We're not going to be bullied. We're not going to kowtow to the liberals. We're going to do what we do best, which is to lead. And so part of that is holding these nations accountable. So if you're going to be our partner, if you're going to be our friend, then you need to act like it. And if you're a bad actor, like South Africa is right now, then you don't get the benefits of being our friend. So I know that's harsh, but it's worked so far. It will continue to work because it puts the world on notice. The golden age of America is back. We're serious. And of course, we've seen it. You've seen it. I've seen it. The president is moving at an incredible pace and with all of his executive orders. I've had a lot of bills supporting the president. And so it's busy now. It's going to continue to be busy. And so you can expect that. So back home to Nashville. So again, as we talk about the southern border, so we talked about the border, Tom Homan, we need to fund it. We jumped to South Africa briefly, but now we're going to come back to where it really hits home. So the damage that Biden has done is so bad that even hometown America, red, white, and blue apple pie, is crawling with the Tren de Aragua gang members. So 8 Venezuelan nationals conspired to target, recruit young, vulnerable, poor women from Venezuela and other countries in South and Central America and traffic them in the Nashville area. They were arrested. But again, this is just one example of where the southern border being wide open has spread and infected our entire nation. There's a humanitarian crisis taking place at the southern border because of Joe Biden's failed policies. But now, in every town in America, there's a humanitarian crisis because these young girls, these young boys are being trafficked. Play the clip.
Now to Operation Crime and Justice. Members of a violent South American gang found living in the suburbs of Middle Tennessee. Police arresting 2 people that they say ran a sex slavery operation for Tren de Aragua. Fox 17 News' Karen Aguilar joining us here in studio tonight to break down these new arrests. Karen?
Megan, investigators say the 2 arrested linked to Tren de Aragua coerced the victims to come to the United States under false pretenses and instead were enslaved to prostitution here in the Nashville area. Young, vulnerable, poor women forced into prostitution in the Nashville area after investigators say they were lured into the country with lies, promising them a better life, manipulating them to pay more than their travel costs using their bodies. Venezuelans Yelibet del Carmen Rivero de Caldera and her son Cleaver Daniel Mota Rivero are now under arrest, accused of trapping these women in a life of misery. Investigators say they use their Tren de Aragua ties to scare the women into commercial sex and exploitation. They and 6 others are facing human trafficking charges for an operation beginning in 2022. Metro Police say one of these operations was run inside a motel on Murphy.
So you can see that what happens at the southern border, those folks coming through South and Central America, they're really spreading across the country. And what you see in the Nashville area, Nashville is about 6 hours from most of the populated areas of the country. So whether it's Cincinnati, parts of Florida, et cetera, whether you go north, south, east, west. And of course, you have such a great transit system that passes through the Nashville area. So what you'll see is these young girls, whether they come to Atlanta first or Nashville first, then they move them on a circuit. And so again, this is happening day in, day out in cities all over the country, including Nashville. And so those young women, they would have been in Nashville. What typically happens, they'll be in Nashville for a while and then they get moved around and they're constantly changing out people because to these gangs, they're nothing more than a commodity. That's got to stop. The first step is to secure the border. The next step is to deport these criminals who are targeting young, vulnerable women and children, quite frankly, girls and boys, and really polluting our country with fentanyl. And so kind of going back to this idea of this pipeline of fentanyl coming out of Mexico, there's also a pipeline coming out of Canada, which is why you saw President Trump talking tough talk with both of our neighbors to the north and to the south to stop the human trafficking, to stop the fentanyl, and to stop the illegal flow of people. So now we're going to get to So as we talked about briefly before, I mentioned this DOGE initiative. You see all these executive actions by President Trump. Again, historic in their very nature. When I had dinner with the president a couple of weeks ago, he talked about he would hit 200. And what ended up happening is he, in just his first week, hit over 300 plus. And so he's setting records, whether it's, again, just go through the list of all the things USAID. You saw the letters coming off of their headquarters. The CFPB, which has to deal with banking. He's cutting and axing that. You know, two agencies that we have been talking about, complaining about, you know, for years now. The president's come in his first month and is taking swift action to cut those agencies. And he's told workers, if you want a job with the federal government, you want a job in D.C., you got to get your butt to work. So again, what you now have are these multiple judges, activist judges, weaponizing their bench against the president. One of those judges is D.C. Judge John Bates, just ordered President Trump to restore deleted HHS, CDC, and FDA web pages talking about transgender surgery. So if all the things that are going on in this country, like the illegals, like the human trafficking, what is this judge most worried about? Woke leftist practices that deal with what? Transgender surgeries. This is nonsense. And again, so what you're going to see is the Trump administration, President Trump, challenging these judges in court. And my hope, my prayer is that he prevails. But again, this judge stopped Trump from ending DACA, which has to do with immigration. He was a FISA judge that allowed NSA to spy on Americans. So FISA is a security bill, but in there's a provision that allows the government to spy. It's intended for foreigners in this country, but it was used against Americans, hundreds of Americans. In fact, we know this to be true. And again, this judge is one of those that allowed the government to spy on its own people. And another judge brought down an absurd ruling attacking Doge for accessing Treasury data. So now you have an entity, an outside body that the president and his team are supervising that are simply looking for the money trail. Where's the money going? Where's the waste? Where's the fraud? Then they're looking for the president to cut that waste and fraud. And so this is exactly what we need in Washington, D.C. is accountability. So you have Doge, you have one of the wealthiest men in the world who's volunteering his time to help the president root out this waste. And here's the context. We have $36 trillion in debt. That's unsustainable. We have workers in Washington, D.C. that don't come to work. And now they're upset that they have to come to work. You have to go to work. I have to come to work. They should have to come to work too. And it's absurd that the courts are going to step in and defend these knuckleheads when the president is in his right. He has the executive authority. And then one of the reasons why I've been so busy is I'm coming behind the president and helping to codify or putting legislation in place that we can vote on to codify some of these fantastic initiatives that we're seeing from President Trump. And so as we go forward, again, buckle up, Buttercup. It is going to be a busy few months. I think we have another clip for you, so we'll let you watch that. I'll give a quick reaction, and then we'll close this out. Here we go.
When you're sentencing someone, when we talk about sentencing, that you have to take a moment and realize that this, middle-class, white, male, privileged person needs to understand the human being that comes before us, that maybe a woman, and maybe black, maybe transgender, maybe poor, maybe rich, maybe.
And so what is he talking about? He's not talking about the rule of law. He's not talking about the oath that he is required to uphold. He's talking about we're going to hold one section of our population to one standard, which would be the law. And we're going to hold all of these other people that he deems special because he's a woke libtard, that we're going to treat them differently. Well, that's not what the Constitution says. That's not what the rule of law says. You and I, Republican, Democrat, woke, conservative, the law has to apply evenly. That's what protects you. That's what protects me. And when you have a weaponized government that picks and chooses who they're going to go after, like we saw the FBI and the Justice Department go after President Trump, go after members of Congress, enough is enough. So kudos to Pam Bondi, kudos to Tulsi Gabbard, and soon, very soon, kudos to Kash Patel, who's going to come into the FBI and do what should have been done a long time ago. With that, this is Congressman Andy Ogles. Welcome, and we'll see you next time.
If you try to transition a child, you are guilty of child abuse, and every doctor, every nurse, every clinician that is helping that is culpable in that crime.
This thing is so full of pork that even Scrooge and the Grinch are happy about it.
There wouldn't be a First Amendment without the Second Amendment. Your right to freedom of speech your freedom of religion, the freedom and liberties that we have in this country are because of the Second Amendment. And never, ever forget that.
She's not going to be the great savior for the Democrats. And they can't skip over the first black woman vice president with the whitest man ever in history, Gavin Newsom.
It's time that we, the people, take this country back.